Thank you so much. Yes, I apologize for not being on time, but I'm here now, and here we go. So, selective cultural amnesia and Northern Irish identity in Terry Loane's The Last Rifleman. Many people would instantly recognize the flag of the Republic of Ireland, the iconic tricolour of green, white, and orange bands. As Irish nationalist and rebel Thomas Francis Meagher put it in 1848, the white in the center signifies a lasting truce between orange and green, and I trust that beneath its folds the hands of Irish Protestants and Irish Catholics may be clasped in generous and heroic brotherhood. Sorry, I was just adjusting my paper to the side of the screen so I could see the zoom as well. In other words, the banner reflects the long-standing ambitions of Irish nationalists that Protestants, largely populating the eastern portion of Ulster and what's now Northern Ireland, could live peacefully and integrated with the island's Catholic majority. By contrast, fewer people can probably call to mind the flag of Northern Ireland. This is partially because Northern Ireland doesn't have an official flag of its own, and those with unofficial status are often highly contested. Officially, Northern Ireland's flag is the British Union flag, but that symbol is deeply imbued with Protestant and British Unionist associations, and so is sometimes looked on with distrust by Catholics and Irish Republicans who favor uniting Northern Ireland with the Republic of Ireland. The Irish tricolour is equally viewed the same way by some Unionists. But since the 1998 Good Friday Agreement largely ended the violence of the Troubles, Ulster has been in a period of difficult redefinition. The Troubles was a period of continual sectarian violence pitting Catholic Irish Republican paramilitaries, most famously the IRA, against Protestant Unionist paramilitaries like the UDA or UVF and the British military. While tensions have remained between the communities, Northern Ireland has moved in substantial ways to decrease sectarianism and promote a communal notion of Northern Irish identity. It's into this cultural landscape that Terry Loane's 2023 film The Last Rifleman emerges. The film depicts Northern Irish identity as marked by unities rather than disunity. In this sense, the film functions as a cultural tool for imagining a harmonious Northern Irish community. In making this claim, I draw on Benedict Anderson's well-known formulation that nations comprise imagined communities, in the sense that national compatriots are encouraged to see themselves as fundamentally united within a polity ideologically constructed, as Anderson puts it, because regardless of the actual inequality and exploitation that may prevail in each, the nation is ultimately conveyed as a deep horizontal comradeship. A nation building an ideological community around unity and shared experiences is the norm. But because the defining feature of Northern Ireland in the latter half of the 20th century was the brutal violence of the Troubles, history works against a conception of Northern Ireland as uniting British and Irish identities. Indeed, as I will argue, Loane's films attempt to rhetorically and narratively construct links between Catholic Ireland, Protestant Ulster, and Great Britain requires massive historical erasures, in which major events of Irish history are either elided entirely or rewritten to undercut their traditional meaning. The two most significant events of this rewriting are a reinterpretation of the 1798 rebellion to strip it of its anti-colonial and anti-British sentiment, and completely ignoring the Troubles. Whether a conscious decision or not, I claim that the film acknowledges its act of rewriting history through historiographic metafictional references, signaling to the audience the ways in which histories, both personal and collective, are constructed by the stories that we tell about them. The movie tells the story of Artie Crawford, played by Pierce Brosnan, an East Belfast World War II veteran of the Royal Ulster Rifles who participated in the D-Day invasion. Now in his 90s and in failing health, Artie breaks out of his Belfast care home and illegally makes his way to France for the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings. Along the way, he reflects on his relationships with his recently deceased wife and their best friend, who had been the wife's boyfriend until he died during World War II. We learn through a series of flashbacks that Artie bears the scars of survivor's guilt, blaming him for not saving his friend Tony McCann, and for subsequently marrying McCann's girlfriend, who becomes Maggie Crawford, once she marries Artie Crawford. The film frequently shows Artie writing a letter to Tony as part of his process for making peace with his friend's memory. And during his travels, Artie meets multiple people who help him and teach him about finding closure. This includes Rory, who helps Artie hitch a ride to Dublin, the French widow Juliette Bellamy, who helps Artie stow away on a ship and find transport in France, a German World War II veteran named Friedrich Müller, who expresses remorse for Nazi atrocities, and the American veteran Lincoln Jefferson Adams, who confides his guilt over accepting his dead brother's military honors. Among these encounters, some momentary and some recurring, Artie reflects upon and comes to terms with his own history, and that individual history is linked with and informed by the larger currents of history, both Irish history and World War II. With this background established, I now turn to the two significant elements of Irish history that Loane's film historiographically contests, the 1798 Rebellion and the Troubles. The discussion of the 1798 Rebellion takes place while Artie and Rory are hitchhiking to Dublin. They hitch a ride in a lorry, and as they're driving, they pass Rory's hometown, prompting the driver to explain that it was the site of an important battle during the rebellion, during which Protestants and Catholics united. And the rebellion was literally led by the Society of United Irishmen. Historically, this is correct. The Society of United Irishmen was a non-sectarian organization with the Anglican Wolfe Tone as one of its founders, leaders, and most famous martyrs. Artie thereupon reflects that the Royal Ulster Rifles was a mixed unit, including Protestant and Catholic Irish fighting alongside British forces. In this moment, the film clearly emphasizes unity and overcoming differences for a common goal. However, fundamental contradictions must be erased to uphold this ideology. The United Irishmen were united in opposition to the British, and so 1798 can only justify unity with Britain through a profound act of cultural amnesia. Considering the central place the 1798 Rising occupies in the historical consciousness of Irish people, particularly Irish nationalists, it seems unlikely that Artie, even if he's a British Unionist, more on that later, would not be aware that the conflict fundamentally undercuts any support for a British presence in Ireland. But the film's ideology of unity plays into the trans-religious aspect of the movement while purposefully ignoring the anti-colonial dimension of a direct attempt to expel British imperial rule from Ireland. This historical amnesia is even more overt with the complete elision of the Troubles from the world of Loane's film. Because the film's timeline skips between the 1940s and 2019, there's a gaping hole in Artie's personal history, a hole big enough to fit 30 years of brutal sectarian conflict and violence into. Most of Artie's life is entirely unexplored, and he's a character for whom the overwhelming majority of his history is a question mark. Now, we can develop suppositions based on what the film says and on the culture of Northern Ireland following World War II, but they'll never be anything except guesses because, for a fictional character like Artie, the intervening years simply do not exist. We do, of course, know that Artie's a World War II veteran, meaning that by the time the Troubles started in the 1960s, he had combat training and experience, making him an ideal recruit for a paramilitary because he could bring those skills to the organization to help train new recruits. At the same time, Artie's experiences in the war have traumatized him, with the film implying that this is the first time he's attended a commemoration ceremony for D-Day. And while Artie's specific religious and political beliefs are never mentioned in the film, we can make an educated guess about which side of the sectarian conflict he would sympathize with. During the 1940s flashback, the trio of Artie, Tony, and Maggie refer to themselves as the Three Musketeers of East Belfast. Now, East Belfast has historically been a Protestant and Unionist stronghold, so the identification with East Belfast suggests loyalism. And while Loane and screenwriter Kevin Fitzpatrick would probably prefer that Artie quietly sat out the Troubles, As an East Belfast man with military skills and experience, it's unlikely that he would have made it through 30 years of sectarian violence without at least being pressed to support, if not join, the Unionist side. In the polarizing culture of the Troubles, a refusal to take sides would generally be suspicious, and considering that paramilitaries on both sides were rarely choosy about their targets, refusing to support the Unionist cause could be dangerous for Artie and, after their marriage, Maggie by extension. The problem is that there's no historically justified way for the film to avoid this problem. If Artie aligned with the Unionist cause, even if non-violently, then the ideological objective of depicting Northern Ireland's imagined community as one of unified wholeness is inherently compromised through Artie's sectarianism. And so the only option left is to rewrite the history of Ulster in such a way that the Troubles vanish. The film gestures to this through its historiographic metafiction. In her book, A Poetics of Postmodernism, Linda Hutcheon theorizes historiographic metafiction as an approach to history or historical fiction that self-consciously acknowledges the ways in which history as such always already exists through narrative choices. Hutcheon draws on the postmodern historiographic work of thinkers like Hayden White and Frank Ankerschmidt, who argue that history as a discipline has ideologically repressed awareness that storytelling choices, what White famously calls implotment, are shaped by culturally recognizable story structures. Building from these insights, Hutcheon asserts that historiographic metafiction is the dominant mode of postmodern storytelling, and that through self-conscious play with discursive construction, authors deconstruct certainties about the past. In Hutcheon's words, what postmodernism does is to contest the very possibility of our ever being able to know the ultimate objects of the past. It teaches and enacts the recognition of the fact that the social, historical, and existential reality of the past is discursive reality, when it is used as the referent of art, and so the only genuine historicity becomes that which would openly acknowledge its own discursive contingent identity. In other words, postmodern historical fiction strives to acknowledge and encode within its own narratives the process of historical storytelling. This may be done through techniques like presenting history being written within the story, telling historical incidents through multiple lenses, or challenging a dominant history through a character who metafictionally contests the accepted story, among other techniques. In The Last Rifleman, the dominant metafictional techniques are Artie's letter writing and the encounters with Friedrich and Lincoln, the German and American veterans. For this presentation, I focus on the letter, but then in the larger article that I'm working on, I'm going to talk about the discussions Artie has with Friedrich and Lincoln as well. So, Artie's in-progress letter, written in bits and pieces throughout the movie, undermines notions of a true history being accessible, drawing attention to the constructed nature of history. Toward the end of the film, we learn that the letter Artie writes to Tony, as well as the one that he had delivered to Tony from Maggie following their friend's death in combat, are both forgeries. Artie wrote both of them. He wrote Tony's letter to Maggie, urging her to move on from his death and remain close with Artie. It's not entirely clear whether this was a manipulative attempt by Artie to blackmail her into a relationship or just meant to comfort her, but the fact that this is such an open question is itself concerning. And instead of signing the letter to Tony with his own name, Artie signs it from Maggie. Seemingly, through ventriloquizing his dead companions, Artie attempts to alleviate his own guilt. He tries to transfer his desires onto the now-deceased other, to have Tony bless his relationship with Maggie, and to have Maggie confirm to Tony that her life with Artie was rewarding. Without access to either Tony or Maggie to agree or challenge his self-justification, Artie fills that silence with what he wants to hear. This is, in a deep and profound sense, an acknowledgement of the untrustworthiness of historical narratives as such, because Artie is revealed as a consummate liar, unable to acknowledge even to himself the truth, or lack thereof, in his relationships. He rewrites personal histories and relationships to make himself more comfortable, a process that reveals how easily history can be distorted through narrativization, thereby raising questions about the fundamental reliability of any historical narrative. Artie's act of rewriting the past reflects the cultural amnesia required to pretend the history of Northern Ireland is one of unity, rather than an ongoing negotiation with oppositions. This metafictional amnesia has profound implications for Northern Ireland's continuing negotiation of its own identity, particularly post-Brexit and with renewed talk of unity with the Republic. But it also reflects broader cultural processes of selective remembering and forgetting to construct national identities and mythologies. Those broader implications are beyond the scope of this presentation, though they are going to be addressed again in the larger article-length version of this that I'm working on. Thank you.